Megan from the garden. It's Christina from Sunshine and Flora. And so in today's video, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about succession planting. Succession planting is something that I usually do every year in the garden just to help me get more flowers and longer harvests throughout the year. So if you are not familiar with what succession planting means, basically it means you are doing multiple plantings of certain varieties of crop in order to extend your harvest. So a really easy example to use for that is sunflowers. So I grow all the pro-cut sunflowers in my garden, and they are a one and done. You just get a single cut off of them. So if I were just to plant all of my sunflowers at one time, I would get one harvest and it'd be done for the season. Now, that is something that I don't want. I want to be able to offer sunflowers multiple weeks at my farmers markets. So I succession plant my sunflowers. Typically, I will do my first planting around June 1st. Typically, our last frost is towards the end of May. And so June 1st is kind of a safe date for me, so I know that the soil temperature is warm enough for those seeds to germinate. So I plant my first planting around June 1st. And then after that, I plant sunflowers every 2 weeks, usually up until the very end of July. And that way, instead of getting sunflowers for just 1 week out of the summer, I actually will be getting and harvesting sunflowers for almost 2 months out of the summer. So sunflowers, again, are such a good example to talk about this. The pro-cut sunflowers in particular have a maturity date of around 60 days. And so when I plant my first batch of sunflowers around the 1st of June, that means I should be harvesting my first batch of sunflowers around the 1st of August. So if I plant my last batch of sunflowers towards the end of July, that means I will have sunflowers all the way through August and all the way through September. Sometimes I can fudge it a little bit and do some planting in August and then have some sunflowers into October. But typically here in Zone 5A in Northwest Iowa, we are getting our first frost in October. And so sometimes it's a little bit risky planting them that late in the season because the frost definitely will kill them off. So anyway, now that I have rambled enough about what succession planting is, I just want to walk you guys around the garden and show you other varieties that I am succession planting this year. So feverfew is another really awesome flower that I am succession planting this year, and I actually have 4 different succession plantings planted of this. Now, different from sunflowers, feverfew will actually put out multiple blooms throughout the season. The first blooms, which this patch was, are much taller, and then once you clip that at the base of the plant will branch out and send out more blooms throughout the season, but they are not quite as sturdy as the first ones. And so while I do still get some blooms from the original feverfew plants throughout the season, I want those first stems again. So this is the first patch that I have harvested out of. It's probably a little hard to see because it is almost harvested out, but I do still have some nice stems in here. So these are going to regenerate and give me other blooms throughout the season. But let me go ahead and show you the other 3 patches that I have planted. This planting, which I'm considering my first succession planting, actually wintered over from last year. Feverfew, if we have not too rough of a winter, can actually be a perennial in our area. So these were actually planted last year, and the other 3 plantings that I have were planted just this spring. So this is my second succession planting of feverfew, and this is actually in my hoop house. If you have a hoop house, that is a really easy way to be able to do multiple plantings of different varieties throughout the season, but I know not everyone has a hoop house. But my second planting just happens to be in the hoop house. So I actually have just started harvesting off of this second planting this morning. I just love feverfew. I think they're one of the cutest flowers. And you can see the stem length on these are really nice and tall. I would say 12 to 18 inches. The one next to it's actually a little taller. And then, like I said, the blooms that come additionally throughout the season are going to be a little shorter, but still just as cute. So my first succession planting is feverfew, wintered over. This particular bed of feverfew, I believe, was planted And maybe I'll have to put the exact date up on the screen, but I think it was planted very early May. And the next two plantings of Feverfew were planted a couple weeks after that, maybe mid-May, and then maybe towards the end of May. But let me go show you those. So here is planting number 3 of Feverfew, and you can see this one is starting to shoot up some really nice stems. Not yet close to flowering, but they should be in a week or two. And so while I'm harvesting that second grouping now, the third grouping should be ready within a couple weeks. And then here's my 4th planting of Feverfew, also shooting up some stems, but not as far along as the 3rd planting. I would say this one is maybe a week behind that one. And I have some really tall weeds that I really need to address. Everybody has weeds, right? Another flower that is pretty easy to succession plant are snapdragons. And this year I technically have 3 different succession plantings of snapdragons planted. And kind of like Feverfew, snapdragons will shoot off one large stem in the beginning, and then they'll keep producing throughout the season, but the stems are just a little bit shorter and wimpier. So that first stem is really what you're going for bouquets. So around my greenhouse here is typically where I plant snapdragons. So this side of the greenhouse actually is my 2nd planting of snapdragons. Let me hop over and show you the 3rd planting. So we're on the opposite side of the greenhouse, and this area right here is part of the 2nd succession planting of snapdragons. You can see they're all really looking good, but not near flowering yet. But then if we move down the bed, these guys are still itty bitty. This is my 3rd planting of succession snapdragons. Pretty small, just some few additional plants that I had. These are actually a Maryland red, if my camera will focus. So these should flower really nicely later in the summer. So it'll be fun to have some bright red stems midsummer from these. So 3rd succession, 2nd succession, and 1st succession planting. So we're back in the hoop house, as you can see, and this patch is my 1st succession planting of snapdragons. Now I have failed and have not put netting on it yet. I think I still can, and I probably will tomorrow, but the other 2 patches I definitely need to put netting on. But I have actually been harvesting out of here. This first group that flowered, if my camera will focus, is the Costa Apricot, and is always one of my favorites. So pretty. It's kind of a 2-tone yellow. But then I have also been harvesting off of, and I don't have any that are fully open right now, these are the Potomac Royal. These are one of my favorites every single year. And then the next ones that are going to be opening are from the Madame Butterfly series. And these are a Madame Butterfly mix. There we go. You can kind of see that they're going to open a little bit different. Here's one starting to open. You can see they're going to be opening a little bit different. They're more of a double petal. So this area is all the Madame Butterfly mix, and my whole entire 2nd succession around the greenhouse is the Madame Butterfly mix. And then just that 3rd succession is the Maryland red. So here is another plant that I have succession planted. This was a patch of Bupleurum. This has been totally harvested out. Bupleurum is a beautiful filler. I still have one that's looking okay in here. It's got these little yellow flowers and then really pretty green foliage. So this was an early planting that's been harvested out. Let me take you into the garden and show you my next planting. So this is my 2nd succession planting of Bupleurum, along with another volunteer sunflower. But these are starting to put on some growth. I know it's probably kind of hard to see because I'm in a sunshade area, but these are probably about 6 inches tall. This is a spot where I planted Bupleurum last year, and it did absolutely fantastic. And so I chose to do it in this spot again this year. It gets morning and end of this day sun, and then kind of this time in the afternoon, it does get a little bit of shade, but they grew awesome here last year. I am also going to be putting netting over the Bupleurum because they definitely will tip over while growing if you don't have the netting on them. So that is probably a job for tomorrow. One other flower that I succession planted kind of by accident this year are dahlias. So all of these dahlias were tubers that were planted about 3 weeks ago. This is obviously in the hoop house, and they popped through the ground and just took off growing like crazy. Some of them are almost at pinching stage, which I will probably do a video when I come in and do that. But these are looking amazing. This plant right here is almost 2 feet tall already. So I'm hoping to get some early blooms from dahlias out here. But let me actually go and show you my second planting of dahlias, which are just starting to peek through and are probably the typical stage that they would be in when normally planting dahlias in my zone. So here is the patch where that second grouping of dahlias are. And from here, you obviously cannot see anything, but let's move a little closer and I'll show you some that are just peeking out of the ground. So this is going to be a little bit hard to see, but do you see that green spot right in the middle, right here? That is a dahlia just starting to peek through the ground. Every time I see one of these plants peeking out of the ground, I give it a good water because when I plant them, I don't water them in. However, we had some rain, but I don't think that'll harm them. But once they start growing is when I start watering them. Between this dahlia patch and my hoop house dahlias, I have 118 dahlias planted this year. I cannot wait to have so many dahlias blooming at the end of the season. And then one more plant that I did a succession planting of this year are lilies. I have 2 crates of lilies going here in the hoop house. I did an order through Jake's Facebook group where I got a shipment of lilies each week for 2 weeks. So this is my first shipment, and my second shipment of lilies is planted outside. So I will have multiple weeks of lilies as well. So this narrow strip at the end of the garden is the other spot where my lilies are planted. You can see I have some volunteer sunflowers going on over here. I do have a pumpkin planted in the corner, but as you can see, the lilies are starting to pop through the soil. It will be really interesting to see how the lilies grow in the hoop house compared to the lilies out of the hoop house. All right, so that's going to do it for this video. I was just walking through the garden this morning looking at how things were growing, and I thought it might be just a good thing to share with you guys the different succession plantings I'm doing. It's also on my list today to plant more sunflowers, which made me think of it. So anyway, I better get out there and get those sunflowers planted. I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope you have a great 4th of July weekend, and we will see you soon. Bye.